So it's like, it's either now or never. Don't wait too long to hire, like start offloading work before you think you need it. You're great just the way you are. You don't need to change for anyone. You know, just show up as you are.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the What You're About podcast with me, Chad Abood. And this is where we have really amazing conversations with insightful leaders and entrepreneurs so that we can understand how they uncovered their natural gifts, how they brought it into their career, and how they continue to do so even when there was barriers or it felt difficult or would have been safer to just do it the way that someone else was doing it. And this is the reason why I wanted to start this podcast. Why, for me, I already love it, even though we're just recording all these episodes, is because I felt in my own journey that some of the things that are probably my greatest strengths, I thought might have been my greatest weaknesses. And so I hid them for a long time. And it was only through the journey of kind of self-discovery and reflection that I realized that this is my differentiator, what makes me fulfilled. And it's really what brings me the most success too. And so when I was thinking about guests for this season 1, I think that we have just a fantastic example here of what it looks like to really reflect on who you are, challenge yourself to be who you are, fight through that resistance. And so, I really want to welcome Victoria Tollossa. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you're on LinkedIn or probably any social, you're going to know who Victoria is if you know who I am, because she's everywhere. Every time I look on LinkedIn, she's has an incredible brand and it is super warm person. But the journey is really interesting itself too, because it's spanned continents, it's spanned industries. She's a Grammy nominated writer. She's been in the music industry. She's been in the professional services industry. And now she's launched her own personal branding agency, Illume, which is on a mission to help entrepreneurs, C-suites, and other business leaders amplify their industry visibility, impact to drive customer growth, attract talent, secure funds. And I think if you see what Victoria puts out there, you know that she's already doing it for herself. She lives it. And so, I know that your clients are just so lucky to have you. So we're going to get into all things today with Victoria, from everything from the music industry to her full journey to the powerful brand and agency that she's built. So Victoria, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to get the conversation going.
Yeah, let's do it. So I know that you've had like a really wide ranging journey personally, professionally. And so, maybe take us back to like what little Victoria was thinking, where it was going, what you were passionate about, like what was driving you when you were a kid?
Well, one thing about let me back up. I grew up in Ukraine, and it was right before the USSR broke up. So our people's dreams were very much, suppressed. We didn't dream. But at that time, I was definitely just a very creative kid. Like, creativity was kind of at the heart of what was interesting and exciting to me during that time. And I was also a very just self-motivated kid. I didn't need my mom to kind of, help me do homework. I was just like, I'm getting this done, I'm turning this in. Like, I was always very self-motivated. But creativity, kind of before I moved to the US, was the kind of the main, I would say, skill set that I leaned into during those kind of early years of growing up. And obviously it continued on right after we moved here and into adulthood. And it just it moved across different industries, and I applied that creativity in different ways.
So it's an amazing start, right? If you think about how far the journey has come, you're talking about like pre-breakup of the Soviet Union in a place where, like you said, there probably wasn't a lot of free thinking, creativity as an option for a lot of people. And so did you find it interesting or surprising in yourself that you felt this way in a place where it wasn't easy to be creative? Like, was it almost surprising to you, or did it just feel like, oh, this is how I operate?
At that time, I can't say that I was that self-reflective, right? I mean, I was like, whatever, like 6, 7, 8, but I knew that that was what I could do for hours and lose myself in it. And, just like I was always like making little things for my mom, like my mom, and then, just neighbors and other, her friends. So yeah, I can't really say that I was mature enough to reflect on that at that age, but that was just something that I could lose myself in for hours without just any second thoughts.
And how was that experience? You transitioned from like what was essentially a closed kind of economy, a closed culture. You moved to the US, and what was that transition like for this creative kid? Like, how did it feel when you moved to the US?
Well, so I went to school on the third day after we moved here. And just one of like my first impressions walking down the hall in the school was like everything was so bright. Like there were pictures on the walls, like the walls were like yellow. Like I'm used to like our schools in Ukraine, they look like office buildings, like boring, like corporate office buildings from like the 90s. So I was like, wow, everything is so bright and like happy, and just the teachers it wasn't so strict and formal as it was. And so it was it was just much more laid back and open. Like you definitely felt the difference and the shift in the environment. And I mean, at that time, we were going through a lot of different things, right? I mean, moving to a new country is never just a walk in the park, but I do remember just being more open. There were more possibilities, right? Like there were no limitations as to how big I could dream. And I guess within like that first year of moving here, I heard a Whitney Houston CD, The Preacher's Wife soundtrack, and I was like, wow, her voice is amazing. Like I was so inspired. I can't even tell you. The next day, I was like, I'm going to be a famous singer. That's how inspired I was. So that's when, after that, I got to work because unfortunately I couldn't sing, and so I was like, all right, we gotta make this happen.
That's it's so incredible how these like little moments inspire us because, if we look through the full version of all of the different twists and turns, it's like always been kind of this creativity, this discipline, the determination to do something that's big, to show up as yourself. And like Whitney Houston being like such a big example of someone who did that. When you're going through that piece of your journey thinking like I'm going to be a famous singer, and it didn't feel too big, you're in this place where life feels plentiful, what were kind of the relationships that you were making with friends, with classmates? Did it feel like, yeah, this totally makes sense, like I'm being myself, I'm like, building who I am, people see me for who I am? Or were there kind of like two different realities going on at the same time, where like to yourself you knew that you had this creative passion, but in life with other people in different parts of your kind of community, you were like more closed off and not showing them the full piece? Like, which side of the continuum do you feel like you were on growing up?
I think creativity became an escape for me in many ways when we moved here. I mean, it was always a form of escape, um, but especially when we moved here, because it was not, like I said, it was not a walk in the park. I was teased in school. I didn't speak any English, right? And it was hard. It was tough, but I turned that CD on and I felt inspired. It was an escape, and a good escape. Um, so that was my outlet at that point. So I guess in some ways, once one part of my world was a little bit more gloomy, right? And then the other part was definitely I was dreaming big and I had big plans for myself.
I think it's really beautiful that you were able to keep this part of you alive, even though there was so much difficulty in the transition. in this new environment, like learning the language, learning the customs, learning the culture, like everything's so new. And that's so much data for someone to take on, right? Especially as a kid, you're like trying to process, like, why do people operate this way? Why do they act this way? Why are they acting this way towards me? But at the same time, you're holding space for like this passion that's within you. And, I think that that's kind of a cool thread too, that, that we talked about before we started recording, about when we think about the different places you've been in your life that we're going to talk about, the music industry and the professional services industry, is that you're always able to hold space for, whether it's bigger or smaller, for like trying to bring yourself out. And I think that's incredible, because sometimes it can be too hard and it can get kind of like shut down and we lose track of it. And I think that's really inspiring, because for a long time for myself, like maybe I held a little bit of space for who I was, but I think for a long time, I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it. And I was just trying to be what I saw other people a few steps in front of me being, whether or not that resonated for me. How did that feel for you when you saw like other people, whether you're getting to high school or you're applying to college or you're thinking about a music career? Were you trying to be, the Whitney Houston that was a few steps in front of you, or were you trying to be Victoria? Like, how were you feeling at that time?
I mean, I think a lot of like high school and especially college, I was definitely trying to figure out like everything about myself, like from like the style, like I used to obsess, like, what am I wearing to class today? Right. Like, how do I want to show up? Maybe not in those words, right? Like exactly like that wasn't my, my thought, but there was certainly a lot of self-discovery going on during that time. But I'm not gonna lie, like I did not during that time period, as crazy as things were, I didn't feel like I couldn't show up as myself. Like I don't think that trauma happened until later, like until like my 20s, right? And the music industry, the constant no's, like I mean, it's like no, 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 to the point where like it really starts to affect your confidence. I think I was a very confident little kid. I mean, I would like the things that I did like as a kid. Like I would call the Environmental Protection Agency, like using Yellow Pages, like I have a school project going on. Can you please send me the like, I was never afraid. Like I was the friend that you want to have, like if you're going to like the NSYNC concert and you want to get backstage, but you just didn't, but your tickets were like in the nosebleeds. Like I always found a way and I was always very confident, right, in that respect. And I went into the music industry that way. But I think it was the constant kind of no, 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 no over, like a period of time, a fairly long period of time, that really starts to wear down on how you feel about yourself and how you want to show up, right? You feel like, okay, well, I'm getting a no, no, no about this particular thing. Well, maybe I should change it. Like, who cares if that's actually how I am? Let me try to let me try to get in there in a slightly different way. And, after so many of these kind of let me try to get in there in a different way, you end up turning into someone you're not, but like just completely insecure. And so that's what my 20s were. That's the overarching theme of my 20s. And so I had to use my 30s to kind of get back to like that old Victoria who was fearless, who was like, I'm just, this is what I want. If I want to sing, but I can't sing, I'm going to still be a famous singer and you can't tell me no.
No, it's powerful. And, we're going to talk about how you kind of brought it back, but I know there's a lot of people, regardless of, what decade that they're in, that do feel this piece where, the way that I talk about it a lot with, like coaching clients or consulting to orgs, is like chasing outcomes is a very dangerous game, right? Because you don't control it. Somewhat, there's a dependency, there's variables. Like in the music industry, it was like whoever was like producing or whoever was funding or whoever the agent was, like there's all these intermediaries that you don't control, and everyone keeps either saying no or telling you to do it differently. And when we're really outcome driven, all we can see is I want to get to that thing, so I'll keep contorting myself so that I can get to that thing. but it's a really tricky game because you never control whether you actually get there. And, for me, in a different way, like I lived that for a long time, about like different milestone, living, about, well, if I can just get that title or get on that team or get into that school, then it'll be right. It'll be worth it. It'll be good, without really knowing even how much I actually cared about those things. Like that output versus input model is like a very different way. And so for you, when you're chasing this output and people keep pushing you down, what were you tapping into that allowed you to keep going even when people were basically telling you like, it's not enough, you're not enough, this isn't enough? What were you tapping into at that time?
That is such a good question. And I think about that a lot. Like, I thought about it back then as I was going through it, and like now looking at that time period. I think it really just all comes down to having this like sense of purpose. Like I had like this, I don't, at that point, I thought I was supposed to deliver my message, quote unquote, to the world through singing. And and then like at some point I was like, maybe that's not how I'm supposed to deliver, right, my message. But it was the thing that kept me going was like, I have to deliver my message. Like I'm here for a reason. I know this might sound a little boo boo, but hey, I was like, I'm here on this planet for a reason. I always felt that sense of purpose, even when I was a kid and I had no like words to actually describe what that was. I always felt like I was meant to do kind of something and deliver a message in some shape or form. So that was really the thing, to answer your question, right? That was the thing that motivated me at the end of the day.
Yeah. I love that purpose because I think that's the input, or it's one of them, right? Where it's like, that's yours. Nobody can tell you whether or not that's your purpose. Nobody can take that purpose away from you. The deployment, or like how you bring it to the world, maybe there's intermediaries, maybe there's variables, maybe there's not. But having the input, knowing that you had this purpose, knowing that you had a message you want to share, I think that's really important for people to remember, because it's actually been extremely freeing for me. Is that like, as soon as I kind of turn to, all right, what do I deeply care about? Well, it's two things: helping people find the greatness that's within them and making their way forward easier. Okay, how do I like to share that? Well, I'm a pretty curious guy, like to learn about people, I like to have conversation. As soon as I put like my goals that I cared the most about with like the gifts that I have, nobody can take that away. I can choose how I deploy that, right? And I hear that in this message where you were trying to find that way too, where you thought it was this one deployment, you thought it was this one output, but the intermediaries weren't necessarily letting it happen. But you did find success though in music. And we're not going to have too many Grammy nominated folks on here, so I do want to make sure that we get into that a little bit, because you're hearing all these no's. You're seeing that being Whitney Houston as a singer might not be the path. But how did you find that adjacent shift in the music industry?
I mean, it was all about just pivoting. I mean, how people, pivot their companies. I was pivoting. Essentially, I was the product and I was the company. So I just started making pivots. So that's one thing. Another thing, by 25, I was old for the music industry. So I was like, all right, so I can't be on stage. Like, it's going to be harder to sell that, right? But maybe I've always written my own music and work with producers, right, to bring that music to life. But I was like, why don't I just, maybe I can step behind the scenes and really focus on the writing. And that's what I did. So it was two parts to that, right?
And how,
Pivoting,
how
but
did it
also,
how did it feel when you did that? Did you feel like, okay, great, like we're making traction, I feel like I can get my message out in this way? Or did it feel a bit disheartening, like, oh, the dream that I had, the outcome that I had envisioned since I was a little kid, that's not happening now, and it's like some lesser form? Like, how did it feel when you made that pivot, when you had the success?
mhm. I mean, I think during that particular pivot, right, from recording artist to songwriter, I still held on to the idea that, like, I'm going to like write a hit song for someone and then I'm going to record my own album and I'm just going to be like, that old singer that made it big later in life. So, but in terms of pivoting, the pivot that was kind of to what I think what you're talking about, the pivot that was hardest for me was going out of the music industry and moving on to just a different, career in general. That to me, for the longest time, I just felt like, oh, I gave up. Like, and I'm not the person who gives up. Like, I never give up. And that was kind of the narrative that was kind of rolling through my head for a while, until I was like, no, like, I'm not giving up. At least, like, I'm not giving up on myself, right? Because after I got out the music industry, I started a marketing agency, right? Like, it wasn't like I was like at home, like on the couch, watching, TV and, stuff in my face. Well, maybe for a little while. But um, I moved on to something else. So I was like, no, I didn't give up. I didn't give up on myself. This was just another pivot, but it took me a little bit of time to kind of tie that bow around, right, what was happening at that time.
Yeah, because it must have been a bit confusing for someone who clearly has always been creative. Like you've always had this dedication to the craft. You've always had this sense of purpose within you. Like when I think about like what you're about and what I take from you is it's like it's those things, right? It's like bringing out the creativity that you have. It's the discipline to continue moving forward with it, and it's like the dedication to your message. Like that's what I've always taken from your post. That's what I'm hearing in your journey here. Does that resonate with you? Is that like a
Oh yeah.
description? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And at the end of the day, it's, we might pivot, right? Our life will take kind of twists and turns, but you don't want to give up on yourself, right? And you don't want to let go of that sense of purpose. Sometimes we don't know what that purpose is. Like, it's just like all this conversation like around find your purpose, find your purpose. And you sometimes don't know what that is. And you might get to it kind of later in life. But I think to some degree, we feel like we see the light, but it might not be clear like what is over there, right, like on the other side. But like we have a sense of direction, right, of where we want to go. And
I'm glad that you tapped into that, because I think that we confuse our purpose with like our title or with our job, or like even something that's like as beautifully creative as being a famous singer. It's kind of like another title too. And we start like conflating like what our purpose is with like our job. But the purpose is something different. That's something that like you hold and you create and you cultivate and you share, regardless of whether it's like in your personal life, in your work life, whether you have your own business. Like these are separate things. Like I call these like the deployment of your purpose. It's not the same thing. And that's what I really, appreciate about your story, is that you get some beautiful success in the music industry, not exactly what you had thought. You end up shifting out of it, and so we're going to talk about kind of your shift more into the professional services corporate world from the agency as well. Like you kind of had this marketing piece that was shifting and moving in different ways, but at the end of the day, you were always still holding space for this purpose of like sharing a message, being disciplined about that, being creative. And I think that if we make sure to remember that that's a standalone thing, that doesn't equal a job title. It like gives us kind of the confidence to like, I'm still being me. The deployment might look a little bit different today, but I'm still me. And so for you, when you were shifting kind of to your agency and then to the corporate world, did you still feel like you, or were you kind of struggling to see like, well, how am I still like following my purpose while I'm in kind of the marketing world, either with your own agency or inside another organization?
it was definitely a shift, and I felt, I don't want to say like a fish out of water, but it definitely I was coming to terms, right, with the fact that like I just spent like the last like from like 15 to I don't even know, like I guess 29 or like yeah, 28 years old, like on this one thing. And that was like what I dreamt about, what I was going to be, right? So it was a bit of a mental pivot, career pivot, right? And there was definitely an adjustment period when I was building the agency at that time, but it was still rooted in creativity. And I love, so besides creativity, the other I would say kind of skill set that I didn't know I loved, like I loved it, but I just didn't have words for it when I was younger, is building, right? Like building out like an idea or bringing something to life, like creating a show. I mean, in some ways that is creativity, right? Like you're creating something or building a company, right? So that, so I was still in a creative space. It was an experiential marketing agency. So we were still being creative, right? With like different installations and things like that. But and then the other side was just being able to kind of build something from just kind of like this idea from zero to, to I think we had like almost 150 people on our roster for like talent wise. So I love that. And so, yes, it was an adjustment, but after I realized, no, you know what? I didn't give up on myself. I just kind of took my purpose somewhere else and expressing it in a different way. And that once that clicked for me, that's when things were a bit more like I felt like a fish that was in the water.
Yeah, you're just showing it off in a different way, right? And I remember growing up thinking that creative people were people that like danced or were singers or were painters or writers. I never thought of myself as a creative person. Like I really liked being in school plays when I was really young. When I was this first school that I went to was really big on that, so I loved being in that. But as you get a bit older, and especially at that time, like a lot of folks are geared towards like more of an athletic pursuit. And, I had the ability to do it. So I moved into that stream. I never really thought of myself as creative for probably another, like, I don't know, 2 decades. Like, I just basically thought like that was for people like you who are like talented more in the arts or the fine arts. And it was actually like, I didn't really realize it at the time, but it was actually burning me down a little bit because the way that I probably deeply felt about creativity is like what you described, which is like you're taking zero and you're turning it into one. Like whatever that thing is, it's an experiential, opportunity from a marketing perspective, or it could be a song, or it could be a relationship, it could be anything. And it wasn't until I started making like a similar shift in my mind about like, well, maybe I can create my own definition for creativity, that I really started like coming back to life in that way too, kind of like a sponge, like getting water again for the first time, because I feel like we take these definitions of like what things are. And then if we don't fit into like that perfect box, then we give up on it. Um, but you didn't give up. You didn't give up and you kept finding a way, you build this agency. What was the shift that brought you to like show off your talents in the corporate world?
A life. So, excuse me. So after that agency, I had a partner. I at some point I had a kid, and I was a new mom in California. All of my family was on the East Coast, and that job required, like, I mean, you were constantly on site, like doing work and managing kind of the installation and the operation and all of that. So the hours were just, they didn't align with where I was at that time. Like I literally had to choose like between motherhood and and being, a business owner. Um, and I was a single mom at the time, so my options on the motherhood side were even more limited, right? So I kind of gave my portion of the company to my partner. Well, not gave, but sold my portion to the company to my partner, and moved to the East Coast. And I went to business school. I went to American over here in DC, and that's when I started at a law firm. Well, actually, oh, I can't believe I skipped like a whole company that I created. How did I skip a company? I started Motherhood Inspired. um, Another company. It was a subscription service to help parents kind of navigate those first few years of early childhood development by providing them resources and toys, books, and activities for like each different stage of the child's life. And I did that for, I don't know, for about 3 years. Unfortunately, it didn't kind of get off the ground the way that I wanted it to. And so I shut that down. So during that time, I was doing business school. And once I shut that company down, that's when I was like, I gotta, I gotta make some moves here. And so that's when I got into corporate world. And
That was a lot of things going on at the same time. You were like a new mom, doing your MBA, you got this business going on, you just moved across the country. I think it speaks to, these kind of threads that you've always had around like discipline and dedication and trying to bring out your creativity in a new way. And I don't know if you read this book with your child. I know he's a bit older than our daughter, so maybe it's the wrong time period. But Adam Grant, I think with his wife, wrote a book called something like All Leaves Fall in the Fall. I think it's called Leaf in the Fall. And the point of the story is that there's this leaf that is scared because it's autumn and the wind's blowing, and the leaf is very scared that it's going to blow off and hurt itself when it falls on the ground. And so it's very scared, keeps wanting to come up with its friend different ways to protect itself so that it doesn't fall. And so they come up with creative ideas like nets and ropes and all these different things to protect the leaf. And all the other leaves keep telling them, no, it's not going to work. All leaves fall in the fall. Stop wasting your time. Like, just accept your fate. Keeps trying, keeps trying, keeps trying. And then none of the things work out exactly the way they had hoped, kind of like you had described with this subscription business. But then when that leaf eventually falls, it falls onto this pile of discarded ideas. And that ends up being the idea that allows that leaf to like walk safely down to the ground and doesn't get hurt. And I was thinking about that because, I mean, I love reading that story to our daughter, but it reminded me of what you were saying, which is like, you were trying these different things. They spoke to you at a time for one reason or another. You come up with the family idea because you're a mother going through that journey. And what I wanted to share out of that story is that like each deployment or each outcome of your gifts, it doesn't have to be the thing. Like, the point is you're continuing to pursue your purpose, your creativity, your discipline, your dedication, and all of the things add up, right? It's like an aggregation of your experiences that allow you to be more informed, more fulfilled, more passionate. It doesn't have to be one thing in isolation. And so I just really love that you shared this story about something that didn't work, because for anyone that sees you now, it feels like anything that you touch in like social media, like, goes crazy. You've got this thriving business that we're going to talk about, but I think it matters that you also had the experience of being told no in music, having to give up your portion of having to sell off your portion of this experiential marketing business because of life. And then you tried to start this other business. It didn't go exactly the way you planned. Like, it all matters, And so I just wanted to like reflect that back to you, that like, that's part of the example too. Not just that you have Illume now and, it's amazing and, you're a big deal. It's that the rest of it mattered. And it also probably made you who you are too.
very true. Very true. That was very well said and summed up. And you're going to have to give me the name of that book because
Yeah, I think it's Leaf in the Fall. I'll send it to you.
I can't believe that's a children's book. They need to adapt it for, for adults.
Yeah,
Create an adult version of that, right?
totally. I think I love reading it to her because like I'm reading it to myself, You're so right. You're so right.
Oh,
Um,
that's hilarious.
so you decide that this business isn't what you want it to be, the subscription business. You're doing your MBA. You're a new mom. You've just moved across the country. What did you think coming out of that? You're like, okay, I'm going to go to corporate. It's a bit more of a stable 9 to 5, get myself kind of settled. I can still try to bring like a creative marketing bent to the corporate world that of course needs it desperately, but can sometimes be a little bit resistant to the most creative ideas. How did you feel bringing your purpose and your dedication and your discipline to kind of the more corporate world?
Uh, wow. Well, marketing, right? Yes, marketing is creative, but, and people maybe might argue this, but marketing, like law firms, is where marketing goes to die. I don't know any other ways of putting it.
What do you mean by that? What comes back to you
So,
from your experience?
because the way that law firms think in regards to marketing, we're like, if you take marketing at a tech company, marketing, they're the stars, quote unquote, right, of the company. They're like, they're generating, but like, they are the people that are like, that are, I don't want to say praise, but they bring in income, right? Like they bring in revenue. At a law firm, marketing, it's the stars are the attorneys and we are the support staff. And that was like, that's like a huge, it wasn't like a shift necessarily for me, but once I got in there and I saw that, I was like, all right, so no one really cares about marketing. Like, why do they even have marketing? I guess, they need someone to like send out an email or put a social media post up, but I don't know if firms really saw the true value of marketing. And that's where like it started to feel limiting in many ways. But I was determined, right, to sell them on it. Like you need this, you can't live without this. Like this is an important part, right, of running your business. And so I started like learning a bunch of like all, like a lot of like the digital marketing side of things, like took a bunch of courses. I mean, some were kind of self-guided, some were like an actual class. And I was finishing a business school at that time too. So I was just kind of adding more tools to my tool belt and really trying to kind of make something happen in this kind of limiting environment, at least for the marketing folks. So that's my 2 cents about legal marketing. And
Well, let me
I'm
ask you.
I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who thinks
Well,
that
I
way.
mean, I'm sure that's right. I mean, I've been inside a big law firm, this was a while ago that I was there, but I'm sure that folks in the marketing team are going to have some similar sort of sentiments. So then I'm curious because we're going to have a lot of folks that are from the professional services background that will listen to this. And so, if you were going to do your plug, I know you're not in that space now, but if you were going to do your plug for like law firm marketing or professional services marketing, what would you offer them about a way to think about it differently and why it should matter?
Well, uh, it's I think the way, and this is kind of maybe it's a bit of an outsider's perspective, but law firms are very much focused on billing hours, right? Like we got to bill, 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 bill. Like that's what drives everyone's like, performance, evaluate. Like that's the driver, right? For everything. Um, and I think because of that mentality, right? Like all of the other things that could essentially, right, support and make it easier, kind of get, I don't know, they get pushed to the side. So I think the biggest thing is just it's a shift, it's a mindset shift, for kind of the partners who are running, the business.
Yeah, I think
And
it's a very singular thought process, right? About like the grind of the hours. And I think a lot of that is there's a training in that industry. I mean, I grew up in it around working really, really hard in order to get results. Like there's like this feeling of direct correlation where if you're not working hard or if it's like easy, then it doesn't equal good. And so I think it's a big like chasm to cross in terms of like, brand building and lead gen through marketing isn't sitting at your desk billing 100 hours on a file. And so it doesn't resonate as deeply with people who have like grown up forever in that industry, especially people who grew up without social media. I do have this hope that, as lawyers are entering the industry now that grew up with social media, like they're very aware of the power of social media, how you can create brands, how you can like drive community. I am very hopeful that because they grew up with it and it's part of their personal life, that it'll be much more logical to them, so that, when the next, Victoria is in there saying like, hey, we've got to like create a brand that like drives community and engagement and also like leads, they'll be like, yeah, of course, like that's how I built my own social media following. So totally get it. And, I'm fingers crossed that, the legal industry will get there. But, for you, you clearly saw that, okay, been doing this for a while, and maybe this also isn't kind of the next stage of how I'm going to deploy my message. And I know that there's been a big shift for you over the last like 6 months, let's say. Maybe it's not even that long, but whether it's through social media, whether it's launching Illume, like take me through that process of like you saying to yourself, I want to get back to, kind of the most direct creative force that you've always had in you. Like what inspired that?
I mean, it was really just the feeling of being limited, right? I felt constantly like, like a bird who's trying to fly and like their wings keep getting clipped and clipped and clipped. So that's kind of what it felt like, being in that world. And I think, it just, the legal space on top of that is there, it's a bit more reserved, right? Yeah, there were some cool lawyers like that I like totally vibed with, like, but a lot of it is more reserved because it's a lot of it is ran by like those, like the older partners who's been there for years. So that was another like kind of thing that felt limiting because I'm not that person, right? Like I'm much more laid back, right? And so between those two things, being limited, right, in what I can do and kind of being limited in how I show up, that I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, this is not what I envisioned, right, for my life. Sure, it's a steady paycheck, steady income, but I don't know, steady was never really like a thing of mine. So I didn't, there was no comfort to me, from that actually. So I was
Steady
like,
doesn't get you backstage at InSync.
that's right.
That should be your tagline to see if anybody remembers InSync. Aren't they supposed to have a reunion tour or something soon? That's what I thought I
Me
saw.
too.
Are you going to be there?
Maybe I'll get backstage.
I totally get that. And how did you find that like energy within yourself to like take such a big leap? Because you could have brought your talents to like another marketing agency or branding agency, and you could have tried lots of things that would have had the combination of like more creativity, more freedom, but also like a steadier paycheck. But you launched your own thing. And so, I want to talk about like how you got the confidence to launch Illume, to like get back into like social media in a massive way. And so what was driving that instead of taking kind of like that half step of joining another marketing agency?
I think the other, I should say, limiting factor of being in corporate is you always have to seek approval. Like you're always selling your idea. Well, I mean, you're going to sell your idea no matter whether you're a business owner or not. But it was always that kind of sense, like, okay, I have to get this approved. I can't just like make a move because someone has to sign off on it. That was another kind of limiting thing for me. And honestly, that was new for me because I just came out of, I was a recording artist for like for and the writer for so long. I was calling all my, my own shots. I ran an agency. I was calling my own shots. I started another company. I was called, like, I've always kind of did that. So when I transitioned into the corporate world, I was like, well, this sucks. I was like, it just felt limiting. So that was kind of between those three things. That's what gave me the strength, right? The motivation to get out of there. But also it really felt like I was not living in my purpose, so to speak, right? I always felt that sense of direction, and And yes, like I switched careers, but it always felt like I was heading in the right direction. This just felt like I took a complete turn. Like this just didn't feel right on so many levels, right? Like those kind of three examples that I gave in terms of like the limiting factors. I was like, this is like way to the left. Like this is not where I want to be. And then I just kept on thinking like in 10 years, like, time is, you can't bring time back, right? So like in 10 years, like, do I want to like look back and say, man, like I should have did this, like I should have made a move like 10 years ago. I just wasted all this time and I'm still not happy. And I don't care if I'm making like, a ton of money. Like it just like it's the unhappy piece, right? That is what you lay down at night at the end of the day. It's not that like it's not the paycheck. It's the unhappy piece. So it's like I don't want to kind of end up being that way in 10 years. So it's like it's either now or never. Like I and taking a leap kind of at this point in my life is very different than taking a leap kind of previously. And the reason is, right, at this point, like I have like I'm a real adult, quote unquote, right? Like I've got lots of responsibility, lots of bills, like lots of like people to take care of. And so this it felt a little bit different and a little bit scarier, but what was more scarier was waking up in 10 years and being like, oh, sugar honey iced tea. Like I should have done this a long time ago. Like that was way more scarier to me than just taking a leap and just
I
going
think
for
that
it.
that reflection is like the part that really matters, because everyone's going to have their own stack rank of priorities. And like you said, that's going to change or can change in different phases of your life. When if you're taking care of parents, you're taking care of a child, you're taking care of a partner, you're being taken care of by somebody, your stack rank changes. And I think that's good and it's normal. I think the part that's so important is the reflection of like, what's the stack rank now? And, for you, clearly like the purpose had like moved back up again, maybe for a few years while you were settling down in a new life and, becoming a mom and taking care of your son and getting adjusted to like being on the East Coast. Like maybe that purpose like rightly did say like, hey, like we'll take a moment, we'll go down to like item 4 or 5. Why don't we like move up in the stack rank, the stability and learning a new thing and testing this other world out? And so it makes sense. I think that's the magic of it, is like reflecting to yourself of like, well, what is it for you? Like whatever anybody else is like saying or doing, like that's kind of for them. And I think what you're really highlighting is, for you at this time this year, it was like, all right, I've got lots of responsibilities. There is some risk, but on the prioritization table, like the purpose and the creativity and the autonomy, like those things like flew to the top for you and you pursued that. And I think that kind of correlation between like knowing what mattered to you, knowing what you're about, and then pursuing that, I think that's why it just feels so natural that Illume is doing so well in such a short time. Your brand is like gotten so huge in such a short time, but it's because of all of this work, all of this reflection, like pursuing what really mattered to you right now. And so take us through what's going on now. Like, we've talked about that it's, the branding agency and you're helping leaders like build their own brand, but give us a little bit more about like what you've been working on in this first, what has it been, like 6-8 months? It's like still fairly early days in this phase of it, right?
Yeah, yep. Still I think like my official launch date was like June, I don't know, like something 4th, 5th, 6th, something in there. um but yeah, I think part of a big reason as to why this kind of grew the way that it did in such a short period of time is because of personal branding, right? Because like the service that I provide is right? Like I'm the best case
Right,
example of what I could
right,
potentially do, right, for clients.
right,
Like that's and and I started building that even before I started the company, right? And that allowed also that gave a little kind of runway, a nice runway for the launch. But personal branding was kind of the thing that made it happen. so quickly in such a short period of time. And so at this point, I've learned my lessons kind of from past businesses, like don't wait too long to hire, like start offloading work before you think you need it. So that's kind of where I am now. Just looking for kind of certain roles to hire out and certain kind of tasks to offload, establishing kind of processes like for whether it's like client work or just internal company processes, and making sure that there's something solid right there. And then the goal is, I'm not going to tell you what the goal is.
Hey, you don't have to.
Stay
No.
tuned. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
But I definitely, my goal, yeah, no, I'll tell you. My goal is to obviously to grow the agency to a certain level, but I don't necessarily want to be there in all of like the nitty gritty day to day
Yeah, of
work.
course.
Like I want to, even though that is creative work, and I do love that work, I want, I don't know, I want to continue building my brand and use that maybe hopefully, right, as a way to maybe inspire people like the way that Whitney Houston inspired me, right? Like I didn't even know how to sing, but I was like, whoop, I'm going. I'm going to be a famous singer.
Well,
So
I think you're already doing it, my friend. Like if that's the goal, I think you're already doing it. And I'm I really do love the part about like you're the example. I say that to people all the time. Like, if you think about, especially in the legal industry, but in a lot of professional services, people use the phrase like trusted advisor. I am the trusted advisor. I want to be the trusted advisor. I should be the trusted advisor. And what I tell people all the time, because I've been on both the sell side and the buy side of professional services, is that like just show it and do it, and then let other people call you that. And that's what I think is so powerful about like what you're showing and building, is that like you're the example. And so you don't have to tell people, I can make your personal brand the most enhanced version of you, and get it out there, because you've already done it for yourself. And that's what I think is such a great message for people to remember, is that like whatever you think you want, just do that first. Let other people see you build it. Give it to other people. And that's what you do, right? Like when you think about how you show up, I see you on LinkedIn the most, is like, how do you think about how you're building your brand there? Like for people who are saying like, Victoria, I've never done this before. Like, how did you think about building your brand in the way that now it seems like everything that you do, like there is a massive group of folks that are inspired and appreciate it? How did you get there?
I think like the number one thing is just get out of your own way, right? People get in their own way. Like it feels vulnerable, like putting yourself out there, whether it's social media, but like there are a lot of like in person, right? Like IRL channels out there too, like speaking at a conference or, I don't know, hosting an event or something like that, right? But it's that mindset and getting out of your own way. Like it's not going to be perfect the first time and maybe not even the second time, but you're going to get better, and you're going to get, I mean, no one ever really reaches, perfection. I don't even know what that is, but you will improve, right? And you will continue to grow. So, but it's that getting out of your own way. That's the hardest kind of, that's the first thing we dive into when I help my clients kind of start posting on LinkedIn, is just get out of your own way.
And when
And
you say that, how do you help them? Is it thinking about, well, like what value are you trying to bring and focus on that? Or is it like just take that first step and then you'll prove to yourself that you can do it? Like, how is it that people get out of their own way?
I think clarity is a big part of it. Yes, it's scary putting yourself out there, but I think part of that is not knowing like how to put yourself out there, or not having enough maybe self-awareness and reflection to really understand who you are and like what you stand for. And just sometimes we're just too close to ourselves, right, to like be able to objectively see it. I mean, even a coach needs a coach, right? Like that objective perspective um, is key. So that's the first thing is gaining that clarity. I mean, it's always going to be scary. Even like by post 50, it's still like, I don't want to say scary per se, but it's still like, oh, like, okay, how's this gonna land? But it's having clarity for who you are, where you're trying to go, and why you're doing this is helpful in kind of getting out of your own way and changing
I'm
that mindset.
totally with you on that. I really believe in this because the reason why I think that is so powerful, like when you reflect on like what you deeply care about, you reflect on how you like to show up, the environments that bring out the best in you, you do create like that clarity actually makes you more confident in it because you realize how true it is for you. And you also realize that it's not dependent upon anyone else to validate it. Like you already know it's true. And so that confidence is something that's pretty cool because what happens is, and this is like, it's pretty cool because we're circling back to the very beginning of like the outputs versus inputs, is that I find for myself when I post, I already feel like it was fulfilling and worthwhile. Like at the moment I've hit post, it really doesn't matter to me like how it does because the clarity of like what I deeply care about, like what I'm about, what I like to share, how I like to help people, I get closer to knowing myself. It's already a win for me. And so it takes away this feeling of like, well, what are other people going to say? Are they going to like it? Are they not going to like it? Are they going to engage with it? It matters way less. I mean, I hope that it helps people, but it's not the definition of my success. And I feel like that's a really wonderful message that you share with how you help people get out of their own way, because when they have that clarity, you kind of have a truth that someone can't take from you. And I feel like that fear of someone taking something from you, telling you you're not good enough, if you speak or you go to a conference or you try to like engage with somebody, like that fear is very powerful. And so I'm like just totally with you that that clarity about who you are and what you're about, like that's the core of everything. And you can take it with you to conferences, speaking, posting, however it is you show up. I think it's an amazing message. And so like that's a great tip. That's super powerful. If there was something that you were going to tell, little Victoria back in the day, or the many, many, many people who are following you and being inspired by you now, like what is it that you're always trying to remind yourself, or you'd remind, little Victoria back then in order to kind of push through this journey and be what you're about now?
Mm. What would I tell little Victoria? I think little Victoria kind of had it together, more or less. It's what I would tell the 20s Victoria.
Mm,
The
nice.
20s Victoria, because the 20s Victoria veered off from like the little Victoria. Now, I think I lost myself a little bit in my 20s. And because of that, I would tell myself to like, like you're great just the way you are. You don't need to change for anyone. You don't just show up as you are. And that's more than enough. So that's what I would tell the 20s Victoria.
Yeah.
But I'm
That's a
back. The 30s Victoria brought it
I love that. I
back.
love that. Well, we're lucky for it. I think it's really important. It's really important because here's like tactically why that matters. Never mind the altruism and how, you feel when you get to that place, which I massively subscribe to. If you're not there yet mentally and you're looking for like, well, what's the tactical benefit for like just telling myself I'm enough? Here it is. There is no one else who can be you. And so in a world where like everyone's learning new technical skills, or technology is like replacing all types of levels of skills, and so technology is becoming this like mass equalizer of a certain level of skill, what else are you offering? Well, I can tell you the most powerful thing that I've experienced in buying and selling services my entire life is the individual differentiator of who you are, your personality. Like no one else can take that from you. And do you know what else happens when you do this? You feel way less competitive. At least for me, I feel way less competitive with other people because I'm like, well, I can never be Victoria. Victoria can equally never be me. So I already know I have an entirety of my own lane that no one else can ever compete with if I am fully myself, if I pursue that journey. I don't have to worry about it. Nobody can veer in there because people could pretend or mimic for a day, 3 days, a week, a month, but it's really hard to pretend forever. So what I know is that like I don't want to waste my energy on pretending, and nobody else is going to be able to pretend long enough to be me. Just like the same thing for you and the same for everyone who's listening is like that is the tactical advantage to like actually being yourself and actually building a brand based on who you are.
Wow, that is very powerful, Chad. I'm with you on that. And like you said, it's hard work to be somebody else. Like it is mentally, emotionally taxing to show up as something other than yourself. Like a lot of the times when I was in corporate, I would come home and I would be exhausted. Not because like I worked my butt off that day. No, like it was mostly because like I had to like put on this like front almost, right? And show up as somebody else. Like that was the exhausting part. So yeah, I
It
like that.
is it is really, you're so right that it's really hard, and at best you get to be a derivative of someone else's life. You can't be yourself because you're mirroring what someone else has. And so, like it is a lot of work to like get back to knowing yourself, but it's work very well spent, I believe. So, I just wanted to say thank you so much for like sharing your journey, sharing your time. I know people are already like super inspired by what you're putting out there. I'm glad that they got to know like a deeper version of, the full journey here. And so I just wanted to say thank you so much and can't wait to see like how you keep building it out, where Illume goes, where you take it. No doubt that all these goals that you set out will for sure happen because I feel like, you've just fully come into like making peace with who you are, sharing it, and like bringing out the creativity and discipline and dedication that, little Victoria always has. So, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you. This was a blast. Thank you.
Oh, and so, for everyone that's listening, hope that you have an incredible day. I hope that if you needed to hear this from Victoria, this message, that I hope that it found you. And if you feel like, it was meant for somebody else that then I hope that you share that with them. And so, let us know what you thought about it. If you have any questions, then, reach out in the comments and, Victoria or I will do our best to get back to you with thoughts on it. So appreciate you for listening and wishing you all a beautiful day. Thanks.